everyone, Ben Chapman here with NewMockGaming.com, here to talk a little bit about Omens of the Past, the new set for Eternal, the new expansion. I just wanted to go over, give you my brief thoughts on some of the spoilers so far, or all the spoilers so far, the official ones. So we've got this handy spoiler page from Direwolf. So I'll be going through each of these cards and briefly talking about them. I will likely be posting a full set review once the set is released, or the full spoiler is released. So for now, let's just give some quick ideas and opinions on the first batch of spoilers here. So we'll start here at the top. And this Airless Trainer lets us know that this set is going to be focused on the other factions that have not been focused on in the first set. So Justice Primal, Shadow Justice, Time Shadow, Fire Primal, and Fire Time. Those are the other factions that don't have a ton of multi-faction cards just yet. So let's take a look. Each of the factions, it appears, has their own special mechanic. So the Huru, which is Time Justice, their special mechanic is Mentor. So in this case, what Mentor says is when the trainer comes into play, you target one of your other units, and that unit becomes exhausted and becomes a student. So then different things can happen depending on what the card says. So in this case, it turns that unit, gives it +1/+1, and if that student had flying, then you draw a card at that time. So this card's really geared towards a deck filled with flyers. Coincidentally, that is one of the prime Huru sort of strategies anyway. There's a 2/2 flyer for 2, the Tinkerer, there's the Aegis, 1/1 flying lifesteal, the Enforcer, so the 3/3 for 3 flying that can silence a unit. So there's a number of good Justice flyers already, so this card fits in with those. There's also a number of Primal flyers, of course, as well. So I don't think this card's broken or anything, and it's not really going to warp the metagame, but it's a nice addition to those decks, and depending what other support there could be for other flying units, or cards that care about that mentor-student relationship, that could make it better. So again, kind of context dependent, but I do like the idea of Mentor. It's kind of a cool ability. But this card is, interesting, but not otherworldly. It does have the right rate, I think, to certainly be playable if buffing up flying units is a good thing. So we'll keep that card in mind. Auric Vigilante, this is the Argent port, so Justice Shadow, one of their multi-faction cards, and it does have Revenge. So Revenge says when the unit with Revenge dies, you shuffle it into the top 10 cards of your deck, and it loses Revenge but gains Destiny. So whenever you would draw it, instead put it into play and draw a card. So it's sort of like a bit of a grindy mechanic where you don't mind if your unit dies, and then because you'll be getting it back later, it'll go into play for free and at no loss of cards. So it is a bit of a card advantage mechanic, but you have to potentially survive 10 more turns to see the card again, barring any card draw. So you are incentivized, I think, to play a bit of a slower mid-range game where you can see your revenge cards that died. This particular card I don't love just because it has the 1 health, and there's just so many value 1/1s right now that are popular and ranked that block it too well. Clearly, though, it's more designed to beat up on unitless control decks. We don't have blockers for it. Control deck doesn't really want to spend a removal spell on this. That's outside maybe a sweeper. So you can potentially attack with it multiple times and make it a relevant threat for relatively cheap, and that comes back. So it definitely has its role, but I couldn't see really being excited about starting it in the current meta. Okay, so we've got a mono time card here. 3 mana 1/1, not that good there, but does have flying and gives +1 maximum power, and warp, which is the fire time, the praxis mechanic. So warp says if this card is on top of your deck, you can cast it. And you can, while you have a warp card on top of your deck, you can look. It'll be revealed to you. So if you're able to cast a card with warp off the top of your deck, that's card advantage. It's effectively like having drawn it as an extra card, so that's great. But as we're going to see with the other warp cards so far, most of them are costing extra power than you would normally want if it didn't have warp, which is fair because getting an extra card is really, really huge. This particular card is kind of similar to Secret Pages, actually. The other 3 cost ramp and time, but this is a little more vulnerable, but has the upside of being an extra card. So, it could have its place, but it's definitely not on the same power level as Initiate of the Sands or anything like that. The fact that it's is so vulnerable to dying, and Secret Pages isn't seeing all that much play. Like there isn't that much call to take turn 3 off to ramp to 5 power, which just is more nature of the format right now. Some really aggressive decks that are all about board presence, and if you're, even this is kind of taking the turn off because you're not adding something to the board that you want to block with or anything like that. So it having flying, not that relevant. It can maybe chip away at a relic weapon, maybe, but I don't know. I don't see this being all that exciting right now. Bloodcall Invoker. This is the Time Shadow. Xenon is the name of the faction. So it's showing off the Life Force mechanic, which we haven't seen other cards with Life Force yet. I don't think they're all going to necessarily function the same way this one does, but I think they all have to do with if you gain life, you get some sort of effect. In this case, at the end of your turn, you get a unit, a Restless Radiant, with attack and health equal to the amount of life you gained this turn. So that is a pretty powerful effect. For example, you play this and then attack with a 4/4 lifesteal unit. At the end of your turn, you're going to get a 4/4. So it can immediately generate value, which is a thing that you're definitely looking for in a unit, especially one that is somewhat expensive. The body, the 5 cost 3/5, is not something you're that excited about in ranked. This one does dodge quite a bit of removal, a notable exception being Suffocate, but the thing that this card kind of calls for, though, that's the bigger issue, is that it does want you to focus on playing plenty of cards that gain life. And there are some definite good ones, but such as like the 1/5 that gains 5 and has deadly. So there are a number of options, but overall, it doesn't seem like if you don't. It also can be hard to set up the getting the Radiant on the same turn that you cast the Invoker. It basically means you have to have a lifesteal unit, and there aren't a ton of those that are great right now. There are definitely some, but this card seems like it'd be better as like a more of a 3-faction deck, possibly. But given that Life Force is the mechanic for Xenon, there's probably going to be more support for it from the rest of the set. So you can't really judge this until you know the full context of the whole set. But we can say that this effect is powerful, and if there's enough good life gain, especially on lifesteal units, this will get a lot better. So Cauldron Cradle, this is a relic that says, and this is the Skycrag sort of multi-faction card here. For every 5 spells you play, you get a 5/5 flying dragon. This is a pretty slow, non-board impacting card initially, and it remains to be seen if you can survive playing this card. Like you play it on turn 4, which doesn't impact the board. Then you have to wait till you can get to 5 spells before you get anything out of it. It's quite the gamble. It really is going to come down to what sort of control shells are available for Skycrag. If there's a viable control deck with these colors, this could be a good finisher. don't want to sleep on a relic that can be your sole primary finisher, because relics are harder to kill and harder to interact with, and this one produces repeat value. So definitely something you want to keep in mind if there's a control deck that plays these colors. Keep in mind multi-faction. This could easily, it's very splashable. Could go into some sort of controlled primal based control deck that splashes this as the finisher. One other just quick cool thing about it is that you can sit on 4 spells cast and then use a fast spell at the end of your opponent's turn or during combat to get a sort of ambush 5/5 flying dragon, and that could provide like additional damage at the end of turn the opponent's not really expecting, or you can get even more value by blocking with your 5/5. So and then as soon as you make the dragon, you'll start your count again for the next 5 spells. So I would, even though on the surface just running this out and then trying to play a fair game might be not that appealing, the current meta, again, if there is a control deck that plays a lot of spells, this will be potentially a good finisher. Something to keep in mind. Champion of Impulse, so it looks like we're going to get the full cycle of champions. We've seen the first 5 champions from the other factions. This is the Praxis one, Time Fire. Kind of a bizarre design. Like, I don't fully understand why. I feel like the abilities should be swapped here. Like, so far, some of the only cards that increase power would be a time effect. So giving that effect to the fire side of this maybe hints that temporary power generation will be in fire, which has not really been explored so much to this point, but an interesting hint at what may be to come. And then the time side of this, the time influence, making it a 4/4. That's really where the money is with this card, because a 3-cost 4/4 is quite good, whereas a 3-cost 2/2 is not playable. So the difference between that is pretty huge. So you definitely want to make sure you're able to turn on that time side. I would say there's just the +1 power this turn. First off, you might need to get it. You might have to sacrifice the unit. If there's no good attacks, it doesn't do anything. Or if there's a trade possibility, you're kind of forced to trade it off to get that boost. How good that is depends on what the 5-drop situations are, or even the 6-drops. So if you have a deck that can make good use of the ramp, then this card gets a lot better. But I think it is definitely, if you were going to mix it in with the other champions we have so far, on the lower end of the existing champions. It's not super exciting, just because, for one, triple influence is not that easy to get, so certainly no guarantee you're going to have it on turn 4, even likely turn 5, probably, but having it on turn 4 when you go to attack is tough. Having it on turn 3 is even harder. And if you don't have that triple time, you're now vulnerable to all kinds of removal, primarily Torch. So it's going to be hard to get this in the upper echelon of champions, but it certainly has some upside. So Crown Watch Squire, this is a 1/1 for 1, which is not good, but ultimate, the first time it becomes a student, it gets +2/+2. So obviously this is a card built to be played with a bunch of mentor cards. So example, you play this on turn 1, and turn 3 play the trainer. The Squire would then become a 4/4, which is really good. A 1-cost 4/4 attacking on turn 3 is pretty strong. And so how good this is will come down to, you're going to need at least 2 to 3, maybe 4 good mentor cards. And assuming we have those, then this could be a card that goes in that deck. Otherwise, it's not great, obviously. So this is the dragon that comes out of the cradle. Not a card you're going to actually be opening in packs or anything. So Hip Shot, this is another card with Warp, following the similar theme as the other one. It costs a little more than you might expect for the effect. The 2 damage effect is not fast, which is relevant. And whether or not this card's good pretty much comes down to, are there good 1 and 2 health units that this will trade well with. Right now, it doesn't strike me as being all that exciting because there's so many value cheap units that the opponent doesn't care if you kill them with something like hip shot. At least you're trading even on cards if you're warping it, but it's too likely that the opponent has a 2/5 or a Titan or something that's too big where the 2 damage just isn't relevant. So the fact that you can warp it doesn't matter if there's not a good target. So maybe just had this thought, maybe if there's a dedicated mono fire burn deck, you'd probably play this just because it's kind of a free 2 damage if it's on top of your deck. So that is a thing to consider if there is a mono fire burn deck, but otherwise, again, maybe if there's a hyper aggressive deck, but I just feel like it's gonna be hard to find space for this because the rate is so expensive for an aggressive deck. All right, Master's Lesson. So this is a spell with Mentor. So you mentor a unit, which remember exhausts it, and then you draw a card for each of the student's battle skills. So this is kind of designed to go with, right now, the best target is probably Akaria, but that's on the super top end. In terms of a realistic curve, though, you could target this with the 1/1 Aegis Lifesteal Flying. So you play that on turn 3, and then lessens it on turn 4, and you draw 3 cards. So that is kind of the dream with this one. And that is okay, but again, you're exhausting the unit, so it doesn't get to attack or block, and you're taking the turn off to draw cards. And again, in this current format, it's pretty rough to do that, especially if you're playing a creature deck. You're probably not playing Harsh Rule, so it's hard for you to come back when you fall behind. And this card just puts you behind on the board, ahead on cards, behind on the board. So a card like Harsh Rule will be the one that you'd want to catch you up on the board. But if you're playing, you don't want to play Master's Lesson unless you have a deck full of units, and units and Harsh Rule don't usually play together that well. So it's this card's in a weird spot. You certainly can't rule it out because we actually, and you think about it, we don't have a ton of cards that cost less than 8 that draw lots of cards with 1 card. And this has the possibility of doing that. Again, it's going to come down to the context of what are the relevant units that have 2 to 3 abilities that are cheaper than 4. If there's a couple other extra ones, this will get a lot better. Like, playing this to just draw 2 cards is not probably worth it. Too expensive, really, for that. Especially given the conditions, like you have to have a unit on board. If you have no units, you can't even cast the card. So this is a pretty hard one to make work, I think. Outlands Brute. This is another warp card. Charge 4/1 for 4. Like, the rate on that is not something we've really seen all that much, so that's actually pretty interesting to begin with. And when an enemy spell is played directly on it, you deal 2 damage to that player. Again, the problem with this card is the prevalence of 1/1s right now that produce value. Grenadin Drone, Amber Acolyte, the Student, the 1/1 for 2 that you draw a card when it comes into play and you gain a life. There's just too many good blockers for this right now. The 2/5 for 3 and you gain 3 life. Like, there's just a few too many things that kind of own this in combat. But that said, it's really good against a control deck. An armory type strategy where they don't have too many units to block it. Charge is just good against relic weapons to begin with. So I do like this card's positioning, and they can't even beat it with a torch because if they torch it, they take 2, which might kill the relic weapon anyway. So this seems like a tool to beat armory or other control decks, but it's quite weak against the unit-based decks, which there are, unfortunately, I think too many to make this that exciting. But the upside, warp, is, it's a free card, so you can't ignore that. Here's another warp card. This is a mono time one, 6 cost, 7/5. Interesting set of stats. We don't have anything like this in the game right now. So it has Overwhelm and Warp. So this is sort of a value 6 drop. I just don't see how it can compete with the Tyrannosaur, the 6/6 that has Killer, because that also generates a card by killing one of their best units, presumably. That's triple time, so maybe that's a thing, but this seems like it loses that head-to-head fight. But if there's a need for more 6 drops, this one does produce some value for sure, but I compare it to, say, the 5/6 dragon with flying that has echo. That provides more consistent value. Granted, again, a little bit harder to cast. It's triple primal. So we'll see if this gets played. It's certainly playable. I just think it sort of is getting pushed out by other 6 drops right now. This is the Radiant generated by that Xenon card, this one here. So it's not always a 1/1, it'll be whatever, depending on how many life you gain that turn. So Serpent Mount, this is, I think, more of a draft card, especially given the ratios here. 4 mana, 1/1 flying. Granted, you mentor a unit, you get stronger on the attack, but this is very vulnerable to Torch and pretty much any damage-based removal. But in draft, it reminds me a bit of the 3/1 must attack every turn flyer in Primal, 3/1 for 3. But this has the upside of it's usually going to be a 3/1, but it potentially could be much bigger. And as a draft card, that is a very potent threat. This one even has the upside of being able to block, so that can be relevant. If, say, your opponent has a 3/3 flyer, you can play this as a 3/1, and now you can actually effectively trade with that 3/3 if you need to. So this is a versatile sort of draft card that could be a really good finisher, and I would draft it highly, but I don't think it gets there in ranked. Again, unless there's some crazy mentor-student deck where that mechanic turns out to be so good that you need as many mentor cards as you can get, in which case it's potentially playable there, but unlikely. So here's, I think, the most exciting warp card we've seen so far. It's 5/3 for 5, Praxis. Overwhelm, Warp, Summon, Killed Enemy Attachment. So there's a number of high-value attachments right now that we want to be able to kill. Xenon Obelisk is the biggest defender, but Chalice, Relic Weapons, there's a number of things that you're pretty excited to kill. And this offers a potential 3-for-1, where you warp it off the top of your deck as a free card, and then you destroy their attachment, and then they still need to deal with the 5/3 body. So the potential value there is outrageous, and which makes this a pretty exciting card. The only downside is that costing 5 makes it a liability against decks that, say, don't have attachments. It's not completely dead because you can still warp it and get sort of a free 5/3, so it's never going to be like horrible, but it might be too slow against certain aggressive decks, but it's exactly what you want against any deck playing Obelisk, which are quite a few these days, and pretty awesome against Control just because it's a free unit if you can warp it. So it's an exciting card. My wish list is that we get a 3-cost 2/2 or 2/1 that can destroy an attachment in the same way. Doesn't need to have warp. I just think having a bit of a cheaper option would be best, would be ideal to try to curb some of these attachments, but the way things are balanced right now makes attachments sort of a powerful thing in the current metagame, and maybe that is what the goal is. So to give attachments a chance to shine. So that's kind of what's happening right now, but this is a pretty good option to kill them. And another one here, 3/3 for 3, which is okay. It has lifesteal, and mentors to the student gains lifesteal. So this pairs pretty well with our, again, the Invoker here. So again, having some sort of triple faction deck for this might be where you need to go to get the quantity of lifesteal units that makes this card much better. But on this card on its own is weak in ranked just because it dies to Torch and Suffocate, number of things, Annihilate. But being able to give a large unit lifesteal is pretty sweet. That can swing a game for sure. So this has utility past turn 3, definitely. It's not going to have like the best targets on turn 3, what are you going to trigger 2/2 and to give that lifesteal? I mean, that's okay, but it's not that exciting. Again, it's going to come down if there are other cards that care about the mentor-student relationship. If that's an important thing, this is definitely a playable one that you'd be happy to put in your deck. Of course, this goes great with the Crownwatch Squire, for example. If there are other cards that are similar to the Squire, then the Spirit Guide gets a lot more exciting. So it's definitely context dependent. I'm just saying if you're going to throw this card into a deck right now, it's okay, but probably doesn't make the cut enough of the time. All right, so those are the spoilers so far. If we get another big batch like this before the set release, I might do another video to catch up on the new cards I haven't talked about yet. But if not, keep an eye out for the full set review. I'll probably be going faction by faction, maybe a couple factions a week. Once the full set is out, and that review will have ratings for both draft and ranked, and comments in general. So keep an eye out for that, and thanks for watching.